Welcome back to our videos on the Leadership Nexus Assessment and Role-Aligned Leadership. In the previous video, we introduced the concept of role-aligned leadership and how the Leadership Nexus Assessment can help us understand and strengthen it. In this video, we will be looking at the full report workbook and taking a deeper dive into the roles and characteristics of each of the 5 levels. Every level of leadership performs a different role. Think for a moment about the U.S. Army, one of the strongest, most ably led organizations in the world. Where does leadership show up here? When I did my stint in the Army, the very first thing I learned was that my drill sergeant was my leader. He was in charge of every daily function that occurred during those first 8 weeks, and it quickly became clear that my very life could depend on my ability to follow his instructions. He led with an iron fist, but also with an understanding of how to get the most out of each recruit. That was his job, the role he was tasked to play, and he did it well. Eventually, our sergeant selected squad leaders, internal leaders who helped encourage and lead our fellow recruits. Generally, these were either natural leaders or they were the stronger, more capable members of the squad that the others looked up to. Although it felt like my drill sergeant was the ultimate boss, it was clear that he was not. He had a captain, the company commander. The captain's role was to make certain that all of his sergeants trained us well and that we performed our jobs efficiently, effectively, and with enthusiasm. He supervised our training, and he made sure that all of the drill sergeants were teaching the same skills in the same way and getting the same results. Above the captain was a major, and above him a colonel. Although at the time I had no idea what they did, I eventually came to learn that they determined all of the training procedures, changing things as the needs of the Army shifted. Their role was to ensure that all of the soldiers and recruits were performing up to the expectations of the general who is in charge of the entire base. So what was the point of each of these leaders? Each had a job to do, a role to play within the context of the base, and also within the context of the U.S. Army. Each one performed his job well. Each one contributed in his individual way to the development of a raw recruit into an effective soldier. A recruit, a squad leader, a sergeant, a captain, a colonel, a general. Each leadership level performing a vital function, each of them distinctly different from the others. This is a great example of how leadership actually functions in an organization. The names are different, the titles vary, but the roles of each level are critical. Each of the 5 levels in the Leadership Nexus has a unique role and a set of defining characteristics. Let's look at them. The role of a transactional leader is to lead within the team. This is the very definition of being in the weeds, because these are the weeds. Leaders at this level can be formal or titled, such as supervisor or team lead. They can also be informal, for example, a strong performer who is looked up to by other members of the staff. Transactional leaders are important because they are closest to the work. In emergencies, they are the individuals who are most often followed. They are the consummate firefighters, leading fellow firefighters, taking care of the team, and putting out the fire. Look for a moment at what happens in an emergency. A machine breaks, a patient falls, a crisis arises. Who is the first to respond? Who takes charge of the situation and manages it until it is either handled or until someone with situational expertise arrives? This is the transactional leader. The characteristics of a transactional leader consist of a strong focus on the daily demands of the job, working hard to do the best job possible, constantly reacting to what happens in the surrounding environment, often unable to catch up. New processes can be seen as threats to tradition and/or stability. They are generally hesitant to take risks and prefer to retain procedures that have been successful in the past. Whether they are formal or informal, titled or self-identified, people follow them. Even if they don't see themselves as leaders, they are. A level 2 managerial leader is often in a first formal leadership position. Like the Army sergeant, a managerial leader is responsible for the team, and his or her role is to ensure that daily tasks are completed effectively with a minimum of conflict and concern. Managerial leaders may be in the weeds with their team, but they are the ones responsible for making sure that team members are properly trained, up to the task, and doing their jobs. Like the Army drill sergeant, they're responsible for holding their people accountable, and they are expected to handle conflicts that arise within the team. It is this tension between task completion and staff member interactions that often creates the most role difficulty for managerial leaders. Most managerial leaders are selected precisely because they can do the job well, not because they know how to manage people. As a result, taking care of familiar tasks is generally more satisfying and often more fun than managing the conflict or disagreements between team members. These leaders were chosen because they were doers, not necessarily because they knew how to manage. So the skill of actually managing people is one they must master if they are to be successful. The characteristics of a managerial leader include maintaining a balance between task and staff issues, motivating staff to get work done efficiently and effectively, developing positive relationships with staff without blurring relationship boundaries, knowing how to hold staff accountable and to do so effectively. They are also able to resolve conflicts with minimal unintended consequences. They understand strategy but may not be comfortable creating it, and they tend to prefer stability over change but can manage change when necessary. Since Level 3 tactical leaders work at the intersection of strategy and tactics, they are tasked with understanding and leading from the bigger picture. Whether natural or developed, this strategic focus is the key to success for the tactical leader. We often visualize this role as being at the center point of an hourglass, with strategy being developed and passed down from above, and the staff below needing an understanding of what they need to be doing and how those tasks relate to the overall strategic direction of the company. Adaptability, vision, and insight are all essential skills for tactical leaders. So is the ability to inspire large groups and to operationalize complex processes. The tactical leader's role is to make sure that all team members have the resources and skills necessary to effectively carry out the strategic initiatives of the organization. While a tactical leader may be pulled into the weeds in an emergency, it is essential that they recognize when this is happening and have the ability to pull back as quickly as possible. They must maintain their grasp of the bigger picture. This leader is working in both the present and the future, balancing the very different demands of each. Tactical leaders are comfortable with both operations and strategy, able to manage short-term and long-term operations. They tend to be flexible and adaptable as they adjust to organizational changes. They can get pulled into the weeds, but tend to get out quickly, are good at holding individuals and teams accountable. They create implementation strategies for teams and departments, and they are effective communicators up and down the chain of command. Level 4 strategic leaders live primarily in the future. Their role in the organization is to create direction, a clear picture of where the organization is going and how it will get there. The most effective strategic leaders have an understanding, a vision of the industry and how it is changing over time, and what the staff will need in order to compete in this future. Strategic leaders need time and space to create, commodities that seem to be in increasingly short supply in many organizations. Setting clear boundaries around their use of time is essential. With those boundaries, they can create high-performance teams that are able to weather all storms and manage the daily crises that come at them. Without these boundaries, strategic leaders often describe themselves as deep in the weeds, ineffective, or frustrated. Good strategic leaders walk a fine line between being appreciated and respected by their teams and being recognized as hard drivers who can make sense out of uncertain futures. Strategic leaders have characteristics that include spending most of their time in strategic development, thinking long-term and rarely getting into the weeds, building structures and teams that enable them to easily and effectively delegate tasks, developing strong relationships to facilitate creative problem solving. They are comfortable with conflict and use it positively, not threatened by and encourage the success of their direct reports. And they tend to be adaptable, creative thinkers and systemic actors. Level 5 transformational leaders break things that aren't broken. They change things that are stable. They create new things out of the ashes of the old, or sometimes seemingly out of thin air. The force of their vision, and often their personality, can be difficult to resist. The role of the transformational leader is to shake things up. When done well, there is an understanding of trends and technological advances that are not always apparent to others. Blending these trends and advances into a coherent vision of the future of both the company and the industry is what drives them. And even if we don't always understand where they're going, they'll take us there anyway. Transformational leaders embrace change and the upheaval that comes from it. They develop a strength of will that spills over to everyone around them. They believe in themselves and the people who work with them. They build stability out of chaos, often the chaos they themselves create. They are responsible for the macro changes that redefine entire industries, even cultures. Often admired and sometimes reviled, their role is to point the company and its people in new directions and inspire them to go there. Transformational leaders are relentless change agents hungry for information. They see a future that few others can see. They have a desire to radically change their part of the world. They recognize how new developments outside of the industry can impact where the industry could go. They do not mind failure, because failure is just another step toward success. And they enjoy breaking things that are not broken and putting them back together in new, unique ways. What we have seen in this session is that in order to be truly effective, a leader needs to appropriately align the skills and talents they possess with the needs of the role into which they have been hired. As the role changes, the leadership requirements will need to change as well. Align them well and success often follows. Align them poorly and be prepared for a bumpy ride. Thank you for joining me. In the next video, we will be examining the role of questions at each level. Talk with you then.